I'm sorry, but that's the extent of my Russian. Okay. So it's I always make it a point to for the first when I come to any country, and I've been I think in about 57 countries. The first question I ask is how one says spasiba in that language. Yes, that's the most important word. In this case, it's the only word I know. Oh, there's another word, niyet, right? That I know. Pravda. Oh, I know a lot of words. Okay. So what I'm going to tell you today is pravda. It's this talk is based on a lecture that I gave 7 years ago about in Stockholm. It's called War and Peace. As some of you may know, I got the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences 7 years ago, and the beginning of the first line in the reasons that the committee gave to award me the Nobel Prize in conjunction with another scientist, an American scientist named Thomas Schelling, was the first sentence in the explanation of awarding us the prizes. Wars and other conflicts are among the main sources of human misery. And they continue to talk about the contribution of game theory to addressing the problem of war. So I thought that in the speech that I gave in Stockholm, which every recipient of the prize must give a speech before he gets the prize, and I thought that the proper subject for this talk would be War and Peace, so that's what I call the talk, War and Peace. Now, today, in honor of Jerusalem Day, Yom Yerushalayim, I'll talk not just about war and peace, but first we'll talk a little bit about war and peace in general, but we'll then later specifically talk about Jerusalem, about the Middle East, about the problems that we have been having over there for a while. Okay. So most attempts to bring about peace have been on a piecemeal, case-by-case basis. Different use of the word peace. This is with an I and that's with an E. Okay? Piecemeal means bit by bit, not addressing the problem as a whole. In the world as a whole, people have been fighting since the dawn of history. In Palestine, which is where I live, yes, when the Arabs say that all of Israel is Palestine, they're right, because all of Israel is Palestine. Yes, before 1948, the word Palestine was not, did not refer to Arabs only, yes. A Palestinian was a Jew or Arab, yes. There were Jews, Palestinians, and Arab Palestinians. My wife over here, the lady with the red sweater sitting in the front row, has Palestinian identity papers. I only came to Israel after 1948, so I do not have official Palestinian identity papers, but my wife has. So the idea that Palestine belongs, that a Palestinian is necessarily an Arab, is incorrect. The Palestine Symphony Orchestra, which existed since the mid-30s, was a Jewish affair. The Palestine Post, which became later the Jerusalem Post, was a Jewish newspaper. On the coins that the mandate issued, that the British mandate issued, was written in Hebrew, Eretz Yisrael, and in English, Palestine, and in Arabic, also Palestine. So it's really, Eretz Yisrael and Palestine is the same thing, and I think we make a big mistake by referring, when we talk about Palestinians, to talk only about Arabs. Maybe I'll get into that a little more later, but let me just press on. So in Palestine, we've been fighting since 1922. So the war is a big problem. It's a problem worldwide, throughout the world, and throughout history. We've been having wars, and maybe it's not so efficient to try to solve the problem of war on a case-by-case basis, just to look at each case separately. If I may be allowed to talk about Russia and Chechnya, about India and Pakistan, about Ireland and Britain, about constant wars in Africa. War is a problem which is endemic and has existed for thousands of years. And maybe the right way to go about it is first to try to understand the root causes. Why do people go to war? In the same way that one studies disease, okay? There are cancer institutes for studying cancer, and they are not necessarily directed, or almost never directed, at curing a specific person who has cancer. You want to cure a specific person who has cancer, well, you go to various forms of treatment, to chemotherapy, to radiation, to surgery, or a combination of those things. And you base yourself there on a case-by-case basis. You look at the patient and you see what you can do with him based on clinical results that have been reached previously. That's one way of addressing cancer, and that's how you treat it, that's how you address it in individual cases, yes? And you have a specific patient in front of you. But there are also institutes that do research into cancer without any patient in mind. They just try to understand what makes a cell go wild. Why do people get cancer? Not necessarily how to treat it, but just why does it happen, yes? And then when we find out why it happens, then perhaps we can treat it. And it's the same way with infectious diseases, okay? Infectious diseases, Pasteur was able to treat specific patients with specific infectious diseases. Robert Koch, who discovered the role of bacteria, he wasn't interested in specific people. Yes? He didn't want to cure anybody. He just wanted to know how disease works. And once we understand how infectious disease works, then we can perhaps treat it. So I suggest, rather than establishing peace institutes, let's establish war institutes, okay? By that, I don't mean that I like war. Believe me, I can prove that I don't like war, okay? I can prove it. I have what we call Kabbalot receipts, yes, that I don't like war. But a person who has a cancer, who establishes a cancer research institute, he doesn't like cancer. So when we have a war institute, like a cancer institute, that doesn't mean we like war. We have to understand it. We don't like it, okay? Now, oops, sorry. Okay, just a moment. What happened over here?
You deleted the previous.
Why do people go to war? Like one studies disease? Something went wrong with me. Okay, doesn't matter. So peacemaking efforts are almost invariably based on compromise suggestions to settle the conflict, but not on the decision-making process. And the key question is, how are decisions reached? The answer is, a rational decision maker advances his interests based on his information. Okay? And the key term over here, the key concept, is rationality. Now, rationality over here, please simulate, how does one say it in English? Pay attention, yes, okay. Rationality is not logical thinking over here. It's not scientific thinking. It's not, it's what it is simply advancing one's own interest. This is the common definition in economic science. Advancing one's interests, one's own interests, trying to do what one feels is best for oneself, based on one's information. That is what rationality means in economics. So now I want you to realize that rationality is not good. I'm not saying that rationality is something good. It's not something that I advocate, okay? It's something, it's egoistic. It's selfish. It's not the good life, okay? But by and large, people do try to promote their goals. In other words, by my definition, to be, not only by my definition, by the economic definition, people try to be rational. So to understand our world, and more important, to promote our goals, we should understand how rationality works. That's what game theory is all about, and I make my living from game theory. Now, being here in Moscow, I can't help but adding a sentence to that. I think the communist ideal is wonderful. Yes. The communist ideal, get this, is wonderful. The communist ideal is to each according to his needs, from each according to his ability. That is the bottom line of communism. And it's a beautiful idea. I like it very much, yes? There's only one small mistake with it. As many of you have found out, some of you are too young, but most of you, I think, are old enough to remember the bad old days, yes. There's only one, so it's a very beautiful idea. The only thing is, it doesn't work, okay? It doesn't work. People look out for themselves. That is very evil, very bad, but that is the bottom line. And not only the common man, yes, everybody, yes, including Mr. Lenin, Mr. Trotsky, Mr. Stalin, Mr. Khrushchev, everybody looks out for himself, yes. So communism, it took 70 years, but it fell flat on its face. In Russia, in Eastern Europe, in China, in Vietnam, in Korea, North Korea, in Cuba even. You know, Cuba is, you know, still survives as a communist economy. Perhaps Cuba and North Korea are the only surviving countries with that, but both are in a miserable state, yes. The government of Vietnam is a beautiful country. It has a big red flag like Russia used to have. Big red flag, and there's a yellow star in the middle. It's a communist country, it's ruled by communists. But on August 1st, 1986, the communist government of Vietnam saw that their people were starving, okay? And they said, okay, enough of this, we're going to go to a market economy, all right? So they have a communist government and a market economy, and people look out for themselves, by and large. There are taxes and all this, but by and large, people look out for themselves, and that's what makes the world go round. So, that is, I'm saying it's not good. To each according to his needs, from each according to his ability is good. I like it. It doesn't work. Okay. Now, with this understanding that rationality is not good, but that's the way the world works, with that understanding, we ask ourselves, can war be rational? Okay? War is a terrible thing. People get killed, people get wounded, a lot of property gets destroyed, a lot of work goes to waste. How can this be rational? Okay? How can this advance anybody's interest given his information? Can strikes be rational? Again, we look at a strike. In the end, most strikes get settled, okay? One way or another. And then everybody asks, after so much suffering on both sides, on the sides of the workers, on the sides of the employers, after all, you settled the strike 2 or 3 months later. Why couldn't you have settled it beforehand, yes, and avoided all that suffering? Can strikes be rational? It doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound that this advances anybody's interests, okay? Can suicide bombers be rational? That is the ultimate. That's the ultimate question. Suicide bombers actually blow themselves up, yes? So how can blowing yourself up advance your interests, yes? Besides blowing yourself up, you also blow other people up, okay? And how can that advance your interests? So these are questions, and we said before, remember, that people, by and large, people do try to promote their goals. And we see that perhaps that isn't so. We have wars, we have strikes, we have suicide bombers. The answer to that question is, yes, they can be. All these things can be rational. We take all the ills of the world and dismiss them by calling them irrational. If they are irrational, we cannot address the problem. Okay? We can't do anything about it. If they're crazy, what can we do about it? If people are sort of punishing themselves and doing harm to themselves out of spite or out of whatever, then what can we do to address that? If they are rational, then once we understand that they are, once we understand in what way what happens in a war, why do people go to war, why is it rational for them to go to war, how does it advance their interests, or how do they think it advances their interests, okay? Because that is the important line. Remember, rationality is not just something which advances your interests, but which you think advances your interests given your information, given what you think. Yeah, okay? That is, so how is it that people can think that going to war advances their interests? And the answer is yes, it can, and yes, going to strike, and yes, even blowing yourself up can advance your interests. Your interests don't have to be personal. Your interests can be the interests of your group, right? You can feel that you want to, that you identify yourself with your group. In fact, all of us over here in this room on this day are identifying ourselves with our group, okay? So our interests are identified, not totally like a suicide bomber, but to some extent, to a large extent, we find ourselves here today because we identify with a group and we want to advance the interests of that group. So once we understand that they are, that that these things are rational, that wars, strikes, suicide bombers are rational, we can we can try to do something about it. What? Okay. What can we do about it? So what we can do is change the incentives. Incentives is to try to make it advantageous for the other players in the game, for the other participants in this situation, to make it good for them to do what you want them to do. That's what incentives mean, okay? I'll give you an example. One example is taxes, all right? Taxes, you want to, when you levy taxes on a population, you want to raise revenue to run the government, right? Now, how do you, suppose you have a certain, the government has a certain income, and you want to raise revenue, you want to raise money, more money than the government now has. It needs more money, okay? So what do? Do you increase the tax rate? No, not necessarily. Maybe you do. In Kazakhstan, where I'm going on Tuesday morning, they have a 10% income tax rate, yes? So if you raise that to 12%, you may be able to raise some money. But when you have a country like Israel, where the top rate, which I pay, by the way, is 50%, not 10%, 50% income tax rate. So for every ruble I make, half a ruble goes to the government, all right? You want to raise that, you want to raise revenue, you want to raise it to 60%, you're not going to make more money. You're going to make less money, okay? You're going to make less. Why? Because people will either evade taxes, okay, so they're going to go on the black market, not declare their income, or they're going to avoid taxes by going through all kinds of complicated laws, or what happens most frequently is they're going to stop working hard. Yeah? They're not going to go out and make another ruble. It's not worth it for them, okay? It's not worth it. So what's going to happen is that the income will go down, all right? So that you have to think about incentives when you're talking about taxes. Mark, here the other example I already spoke about. I don't have to go into that. I spoke about it a couple of slides ago. Market economies, yes, you have to give an incentive to people to work. Yeah? If they work for somebody else, they're not going to do it. All right, I talked about that redemption of prisoners. Redeeming prisoners is a very important thing, as we in Israel know only too well. But the Talmud says it is forbidden to redeem prisoners for a too high a price. It's forbidden to redeem prisoners, forbidden by Jewish law to redeem prisoners. And in fact, there were great rabbis who were taken prisoner in the Middle Ages, and their congregations wanted to redeem them by paying a ransom. And the rabbis forbade it, and they died in jail. Okay? Because by redeeming prisoners for an outlandish price, the reason is that you give an incentive to the other side to run after you and to put you in prison, yes, and to imprison you. Okay, you give an incentive by giving, you make it worthwhile for them, even at some risk. All right. So that is the wrong thing to do, and there are many, many other examples. I'm not going to go into it at the moment. That is a different lecture. So we want peace. We don't want war. All right. We want peace. What are incentives for peace? Incentives for peace. So one idea is to make concessions. Make one-sided concessions to the person, to the side that you are speaking with. Okay? And perhaps that's an incentive that will bring about peace. Well, we don't even have to look at game theory. Let's look at history. Munich, 1938. Hitler threatens to go to war with the Western powers, with England and France, unless he is given the border area of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, and the Allies agreed to this. The French Prime Minister and the English Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, go to Munich, and they discuss it with Hitler. Hitler is adamant. Finally, they sign an agreement, Munich Agreement of April 1938, which provides that the Germans can go into Czechoslovakia and take over, but they promise not to have, and this is their last demand, no more demands. Chamberlain comes home to the House of Commons in England, and he says, gentlemen, there was only one lady in the House of Commons at the time, so he says, lady and gentlemen, I have brought with me peace in our time. What he brought with him was war. That's what he brought with him, not peace. Not only did he not bring peace, he actually brought war, which broke out, and by the way, the whole House of Commons stood up and cheered. Stood up, he got a standing ovation, except for one person, Winston Churchill. Sat on his head. Okay? So what, on September 1st, 1939, barely a year and a half, less than a year and a half after Munich, Hitler goes into Poland. On September 3rd, Britain declares war on Germany, and the Foreign Office in London telegraphs the ambassador, the British ambassador to Germany, and informs him of this. The British ambassador immediately requests an appointment with von Ribbentrop, the foreign minister of Germany, and he gets the appointment, he goes there, and he informs von Ribbentrop that Britain is at war with him. Von Ribbentrop immediately phones Hitler, immediately. Hitler throws a fit of anger, one of his famous fits of anger, which are, and this is one of the biggest ones, September 3rd, 1938. He was angry because Chamberlain cheated him. Chamberlain led him to believe that no matter what he does, England will acquiesce. And in fact, Chamberlain wanted to acquiesce. Even then, even in September 1938, he wanted to stay out of war. And the British cabinet told him, if we stay out, then you are no longer Prime Minister of England, and England goes to war afterwards. So how did Chamberlain cheat Hitler? Hitler thought that Chamberlain was the boss in England. That anything, just like anything Hitler says goes in Germany, he thought that anything Chamberlain says goes in England. But it is wrong. England was a democracy, Germany was a dictatorship. So he cheated him. And who caused World War II? Who brought it about? Hitler? No. Chamberlain brought World War II. Concessions bring war. They do not bring peace. The other side of the coin is disarmament. I grew up in the United States. Some of the years of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, I lived in the United States until 1956. In 1956, I moved to Israel. But still, I traveled frequently to the United States, and so I sort of saw the Cold War from the American point of view. And now I'm in Moscow, on the other side. During the years of the Cold War, it was very fashionable in the United States to press for disarmament, nuclear disarmament. I remember once seeing a bumper sticker in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the bumper sticker on the back of a car, it said, "One nuclear explosion could ruin your whole day." Okay? So this was a humorous way of advancing the agenda of disarmament and even perhaps one-sided disarmament, but certainly disarmament. Okay? And it was wrong. It was wrong. What kept the Cold War from going hot? What kept the Cold War from going hot? Disarmament? No. What kept the Cold War from going hot is, the Cold War was not a war. Understand this. It's not a war. It was peace. Okay? The Cold War was peace. It wasn't friendly, but it was peace. What kept it from going into a war? What kept it was that there were airplanes on both sides, in the air with nuclear weapons, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, for 40 years, all the time, airplanes in the air. That's what kept the Cold War from going on. So disarmament is not an incentive for peace, it's an incentive for war.
So you agree with Iran?
Excuse me?
So you agree with Iran?
Good question.
I'll answer questions afterwards. Okay? I'll answer questions afterwards. You want peace? Go to the biggest champions of peace in the world history. Yeah? Well, who has the World Cup in soccer? Who has the World Cup now?
Spain.
Spain. We want the Spain of peace. The World Cup in peace. Who has it? The Romans. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, lasted for 238 years. Okay? It lasted for 238 years. There was no war in the Western world. In China, I'm not talking about China. In the whole world at that time, yes, there was no war. So the biggest champions, the World Cup in peace belongs to the Romans. Were the Romans nice people? No. They burnt our temple. They sent us off into Galut. They were not nice people. I don't like them. But you have to hand it to them. They knew how to make peace. Okay? And what was their motto? Si vis pacem para bellum. That's the original. If you want peace, prepare for war. Okay? And they were right. That's game theory, okay? They understood game theory before Tom Schelling and your humble servant, all right? If you want peace, prepare for war, because that gives the incentive to the other side. That's what happened in the Cold War. That's what did not happen in Munich, okay? Prepare for war, and if you prepare for war, you won't have to fight. If you don't prepare for war, and the preparation for war is in tanks, in guns, in fighter aircraft, bombers, in soldiers, in troops, but that's not the main thing. You know what the main thing is? Up here. Okay? Up here. You have to be ready to say to the other side, we want peace, but you know what? If you want to fight, let's fight. Okay? And if you are ready to say this to the other side, and not only say it, but also think it yourself, if you're ready to think it, then you'll get peace. He's not quite the holder of the World Cup, but he got, in any case, the Nobel Peace Prize. Mr. Barack Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize in 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago. And what did he say? And not just say it in some speech. And Oslo, on getting the Peace Prize, he said, the belief that peace is desirable is rarely enough to achieve it. He's a smart young man, okay? Just shouting, peace, peace, posters with doves, that's not going to bring about peace. No, that will bring about war. And that's in his Nobel Peace Prize lecture in Oslo on the 10th of December, 2009. So now I've been talking about war and peace, and now, remember the title of my lecture was War and Peace in the Middle East. So I did the first line, now we're going to get to the Middle East. Okay? Now I want you to understand something. I don't know whether you know anything about me, but let me just put it on the line. I want peace. Okay? Like I explained to you before, I want peace. I have good reasons to want peace. Beyond that of most Israeli citizens, okay? Unfortunately. And I do want peace. So I want to promote that. Like many Israelis. The question is, how do you get it? Okay? How do you get peace? By shouting, peace, peace? Okay? Is that how you get it? Do you get it by concessions? Do you get it by gestures? Do you get it by expelling 10,000 Jews from their homes, as Israel did 6 years ago? We expelled 10,000 Jews from their homes in the neighborhood of Gaza. Does that bring peace? No. These bring war. They don't bring peace. Just like Chamberlain came to the House of Commons and said, I have brought with me peace in our time, and he brought war. And just like disarming would have brought war, the exaggerated desire for peace brings war. Okay? It's a game. There are two sides to this. I don't get what I want. It's like Barack Obama said. I want peace, but it's not enough to want peace. Yeah, the desire. Yes, you have to convince the other side also that they should want peace. You have to give them incentives. You have to give them incentives to make a deal with you. Okay? The expulsion of 10,000 Jews from their home, which happened in the summer of '05, what it brought about was what's called the Second Lebanon War, which is the war of summer '06, directly, because they saw, the other side saw that it was, that the pressure on Israel was bringing results. The bombardment of southern Israel, and specifically Sderot, but this has in recent years even expanded much further beyond Sderot to include Ashkelon and other cities in southern Israel. And it also brought the Cast Lead campaign. We ourselves brought the Cast Lead campaign. Just like Hitler brought, just like Chamberlain brought about the declaration of war of Britain in 1939, when he made the Munich Agreement a year and a half earlier, just like that, we, by our expulsion of the Jews from Gaza in the summer of '05, we eventually brought about the Cast Lead campaign. We didn't want to, but we did. Let me quote a verse from Jeremiah. Ki shtayim ra'ot asa ami, oti azvu, מקור מים חיים, לחצוב להם בורות, בורות נשברים אשר לא יכילו המים. For my people did two evils. They left me, the source of living waters, to dig for themselves wells, broken wells that will not hold water. Yeah. We left humanity, we left morality, we left brotherly love, we left everything that's good and desirable by expelling 10,000 people from their homes. Maybe we thought we were doing something good, at least some people in Israel. I don't think Arik Sharon thought he was doing anything good, but some people in Israel did. So they said it's worth it to do this evil to gain another good, to gain peace. But actually, they did two evils. Not only did they do this moral monstrosity, but they also brought about war with the moral monstrosity. Two evils. They dug a well which will not hold. Yes, they brought war rather than peace. So, how do we get peace? They say, okay, Professor Aumann, you've convinced us, yes, but we want peace. How do we get it? Yes. So I said, well, it's going to be very, very difficult, yes. We must convince our Arab cousins that we are here to stay, and we have been giving them all the information, all the indications that we are not here in Moscow, but in Israel to stay. We are in Israel to stay. We must convince them of that, and we have been feeding them all the information to convince them that we are willing to leave, even expelling ourselves. Expelling ourselves. The first time in history that a people expelled itself. Jews have been expelled from various countries over and over again, including various areas of Russia, from France, from Spain, from England. Armenians have been expelled by the Turks. Expelling people is nothing new. But the people expelling themselves, we are the originators of that. Yes, that's what we. So I say, how are we going to convince our Arab cousins that we're here to stay after the expulsion? That will be very, very difficult. It will take many years. So we must be patient. If we want peace now, we will never get it. If we are willing to wait, our children and grandchildren may have peace. We must sit tight, expel nobody, not Arabs, not Jews, from their homes. We must avoid collective measures like denying electricity. The collective measures don't do any good. They just, because it is not the general population that is conducting the campaign against Israel. It's the leadership of the Palestinian Arabs, okay, not the Palestinian Jews, but the Palestinian Arabs, the leadership. So by denying electricity, don't worry, the leaders have electricity. It's not going to affect anybody. We must use focused measures, like Mr. Obama. Let me be specific about that. Focused measures, I mean targeted killings of Arab leaders of the movement to destroy Israel. Okay? This used to be a no-no until Obama himself started using it in a big way in Afghanistan. Now it's considered okay. We must improve the quality of life. For example, enable movement and commerce as freely as possible. One of the biggest problems in that Arabs in the territories now face is the what are they called? Mahsumim, how does one say it in English? Checkpoints, yeah. We should do everything we can to remove this. And we should respond to provocations in a predictable way. In other words, when they send one rocket, we should say, okay, you sent one rocket, we're going to send in half an hour, we're going to shell the source of this fire. Okay? We're going to send one or two shells or missiles, airborne missiles, to the source of this fire. That's it. And it has to be predictable, and it has to be believable. So they have to know that when they do that, they're going to get it back in a measured way, and they have to know this, it has to be done. And most important, perhaps, is we have to insist on the Oslo Agreement provisions calling for education, for peace and tolerance. Yes. Education in the Palestinian Arab territories, the education is awful. The children are taught to hate Israel. Those children who were children in 1992 at the time that the Oslo Agreement was signed, they are now the leaders of the political leaders of the Palestinian Arabs. The children we are educating today will be, sooner than you realize, they will be the leaders. We did not insist on carrying out those provisions. We have to insist on it. So you see over here, we have information and we have goals. So we have to try to change their information and change their goals. Okay? And now we will get back to my Russian. Thank you. Спасибо. There was a question before about Iran, yeah?
Yes. First, sorry for interrupting in the middle.
be consistent, okay? I agree with myself, even about Iran. I think Iran is less of a threat than is made out to be by our newspapers, yes, not by our government, but by our newspapers. It's less of a threat because I think the leaders of Iran are rational.
Really?
They are, yes, I think so. I think rational in the sense of wanting to advance their goals. By rattling the sabers, they are in fact advancing their goals. They succeed very nicely. I do not think that they want to see 7 Iranian cities destroyed. I don't think so. I'm not sure. So I would rather see an atom-free Iran. But I think it's not as much of a threat as it's made out to be. As long as we have the ability to respond, and that is not only the appropriate weapons, but also the appropriate delivery materials. Okay. Now I want to be a little more specific about that. I think Iran is less of a threat. What is a threat is if the technology that is being developed in Iran is allowed to get out of Iranian hands, is allowed to get into the hands of groups like Al-Qaeda and so on. The difference being that Iran has an address. We can look them up in the phone book and we can send them packages, okay? But Al-Qaeda does not have an address, okay? If you don't have an address, that changes the whole picture. So, but I think one can find ways to deal with that also. This is not the place for it. Thank you.
Спасибо. У нас сейчас внизу во дворе будет церемония выступления посла